3. Mission to Florida. Spy fever remained rampant in America as Napoleon Bonaparte emerged from the political turmoil in France as a new unifying force on the continent. The ambitions of the new French regime soon became apparent to President Jefferson. The Treaty of Fontainebleau, 1762, ceded the Louisiana Territory to Spain, but the secret Treaty of San Ildefonso, 1800, returned the province to France at the behest of Napoleon, who projected the revival of a colonial empire in North America. The Treaty of Madrid, 1801, confirmed the retrocession, and shortly thereafter the matter came to Jefferson's attention, prompting him to begin efforts for the purchase of New Orleans and West Florida. The result of these actions was the acquisition of the entire Louisiana area and a heightened sensitivity to the intrigues of Bonaparte. The French were not the only threat to the security and sovereignty of the infant United States at this time. The phobias about spies and espionage within America were kindled anew with the disclosure of the so-called Burr conspiracy. Shortly after the duel in which Alexander Hamilton was fatally wounded, July 11, 1804, Aaron Burr began his efforts at organizing a movement for separating the western territories of the Mississippi region from the United States. After being refused financial assistance for his cause by the British, Burr obtained a small sum from the Spanish and began focusing upon lands of the Southwest and Mexico for establishing a Western empire. It is still unclear if his intent was treasonable or merely a filibustering expedition against his benefactors in the Spanish dominions. Nevertheless, Burr is known to have made a tour of the Mississippi River Valley, May through September 1805, and to have conferred with General James Wilkinson, commander of the armed forces in that region. At the end of August 1806, he stayed at Blennerhassett's Island on the Ohio River, where he recruited some 60 to 80 men and 10 boats. In the meantime, Wilkinson warned Jefferson of Burr's activities, and the president issued a proclamation on November 27, 1806, warning citizens against participating in an illegal expedition against Spanish territory. Unaware of this declaration, Burr and his company began their journey down the Mississippi, passing several American forts without interference. When they came within 30 miles of Natchez, Burr learned that Wilkinson had betrayed him, and he fled toward Spanish Florida, but was captured and arrested in Alabama. Indicted for treason, Burr's trial before Chief Justice Marshall presiding over the U.S. Circuit Court ended in an acquittal. Burr went into European exile to escape further prosecutions for murder in New York and New Jersey in the case of his duel with Hamilton, and for treason in Ohio, Kentucky, Mississippi, and Louisiana. In spite of the confusion about the exact nature of Burr's expedition, popular sentiments against France and Spain remained fixed. The Louisiana Purchase of 1803 left the status of Spanish-ruled East and West Florida unsettled. Jefferson supported the view that Louisiana included the portion of Florida between the Mississippi River to the west and the Perdido River to the east, the most southern portions of the current states of Alabama and Mississippi. In 1810, a group of expansionists led a revolt in the Spanish Dominion, captured the fortifications at Baton Rouge, and proclaimed the independent Republic of West Florida. On October 27th, a month after its liberation, the Republic was proclaimed a U.S. possession, and its military occupation as part of the Orleans Territory was authorized. There were also designs on West Florida, which Congress ultimately incorporated into the Mississippi Territory on May 14, 1812, and scattered outbursts of opposition to Spanish authority within the Florida Peninsula. Into this situation, President Madison dispatched George Matthews as a political emissary and intelligence agent. Ordered to proceed secretly to Florida, Matthews was to present himself to the Spanish authorities as an American commissioner authorized to accept such territory as might be turned over to the United States by Spain. Quote, "The Peninsular War was then cauterizing Spain, and the colonial office in Madrid had neither funds nor power. A new war between Britain and the United States was foreseen in 1811, and President Madison believed that the English would probably seize Florida as a base of operations. To prevent this, he appointed Matthews and Colonel John McKee, an Indian agent, to negotiate with the Spanish governor and secure, if possible, a cession of the provinces. They were to fix a date for their return, if desired. In case the commissioners were successful, a provisional government was to be established. But if unsuccessful, it was understood from the beginning that forcible possession was to be taken, should there be any reason to suppose a foreign power was moving to capture the Floridas. McKee seems to have abandoned this enterprise, leaving Matthews to carry on alone, which was very much to the gentleman's taste. He was a native of Ireland, had fought in the Revolutionary War, and had risen to the rank of general. No celebrated exploit of that struggle is connected with his name, but he was described as a man of unsurpassed bravery and indomitable energy, strong-minded but almost illiterate. Moving to Georgia in 1785, his indomitable energy won him election as governor the very next year. In 1794 and 1795, he was again elected governor of the state, and sometime thereafter, though entitled to be called both honorable and general, he did not disdain to work for the War Department as a special agent on the Florida frontier." End quote. As an agent provocateur, Matthews took it upon himself to recruit former Americans residing in Spanish Florida to revolt against their foreign ruler. When the colonial governor indicated opposition to these activities, Matthews returned to Georgia, where he gathered a private army of sharpshooting frontiersmen and Indian fighters, and once again entered the Spanish territory on a mission of espionage. Quote, "A number of Georgian frontiersmen, preparing for a descent upon Florida, assembled on the opposite bank of the St. Mary's River. Uniting with the border settlers on the Spanish side, they proceeded to organize an independent Republic of Florida, with Colonel John McIntosh as president and a Colonel Ashley as military chief. Fernandina on Amelia Island had become, in 1808, a port of free entry for foreign vessels. On the excuse of protecting American shipping interests, General Matthews determined to occupy Fernandina and Amelia Island, and to that end sent 9 armed vessels into the harbor. Forces of the Republic of Florida he enlisted in his project, and commanded by Ashley, they approached Fernandina by water and summoned the Spanish commander, Don Jose Lopez, to surrender. Lopez was forced to sign articles of capitulation March 17, 1812, possibly a delicate compliment to the Irishman Matthews. These articles, which added to the political apoplexy of the Spanish minister in Washington, provided that Fernandina should remain a free port, but in case of war between Britain and the United States, British ships could not enter the harbor after May 1, 1813. End quote. In Washington, the Spanish minister maintained a vehement protest of Matthews' activities, even though the Fernandina settlement constituted something of a compromise of his diplomatic position. Reluctantly, President Madison and Secretary of State James Monroe announced that Matthews had misunderstood his instructions. Quote, "Governor Mitchell of Georgia was appointed to replace him and directed to assist Estrada, the Spanish colonial governor, in enforcing order. Because of his unwanted versatility, Matthews was dismissed, but his successor seems to have been given instructions no less opaque. Mitchell, it is said, was to obtain safety for the revolutionists in Florida, aid them as much as possible, and withdraw troops as slowly as might seem feasible. No better way of pursuing Matthews' imperial aim could have been contrived, and Mitchell made so much of his opportunities that the armed force Matthews had organized and commanded did not retire from Florida for 14 months. Then, in May 1813, it moved to join the army of Andrew Jackson, who was himself presently ordered to renew the invasion and march upon Pensacola. Only a Congressional outcry checked this expeditionary thrust, and Old Hickory turned aside to the timely defense of New Orleans." End quote. How far astray had Matthews actually gone in interpreting his instructions? Was he isolated from changing policy developments, or the architect of a self-styled soldier of fortune escapade. Quote, "It was known at the time that George Matthews reported regularly to Washington. While discussing the necessity of occupying Florida to prevent the British from seizing it as a base, the American Congress sat in secret session, and many precautions were taken to keep the matter from becoming known. Matthews was in no sense, therefore, a filibuster or private plotter acting from selfish motives. Instead, he typified the land-hungry American frontiersman of his age, who regarded himself as an agent, not a bit secret, of divine interposition, and looked upon no boundary of the United States as final until it vanished into a sea, gulf, or ocean. Matthews' conduct as a government commissioner was indefensible, and it is easy to understand why his project, carried on by his successor, has no forward place in the annals of the day. A blunt instrument adding one more note of apology to the sorry record of events surrounding the War of 1812, he has to be ignored as he was formally disowned." End quote. And with regard to the evolution and advancement of the intelligence function, the following conclusion seems appropriate. Quote, "There was very little secret service of a professional mold in the 3-year War of 1812, and not much effective work of the intelligence on either side. This is surprising, for there were any number of living Americans who had been officers in the Revolutionary War, and some of them ought to have remembered General Washington's profitable dependence upon systematic espionage. And it is all the more surprising as a fault of the British, for Napoleon was beaten and exiled to Elba, and in 1814 the government in London could afford to train its heaviest guns upon the weaker American adversary." Footnote: Rowan and Deerdorfer, page 244. There is evidence that Andrew Jackson had a secret agent in Pensacola, Florida, who was instrumental in informing Jackson of the size and armament of his opposition at the Battle of New Orleans, and it is also thought that Jackson had utilized the services of the notorious pirate Jean Lafitte for intelligence purposes, but these were very crude and elementary endeavors. Pages 244 through 246. End footnote. This is Our Hidden History